Warning: the following podcast contains graphic content that may be disturbing or triggering to some listeners. Discretion is advised. The Papa Tango Delta Sierra podcast is available free of charge thanks to the support of Cracked Armor. Their mission is to raise awareness for PTSD, TBI, and mental health to support those who struggle. By creating an army of warriors who represent the gear, their hope is that it will send the message to others that they are not alone. Go to crackedarmor.com, say hi to Mark Long, read about the story, find some research information about PTSD, and support the cause by buying some gear.
(10-9) Did you say Papa Tango Sierra Delta? 10-4.
There's so much left to do, so many things I wanna say, and I sing. Don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.
Welcome to the second episode of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. My name is Larry Payton, and I have been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress. It's taken me a long time to step out of the shadows and speak publicly about this. I mean, there's a number of reasons for that. The biggest one is definitely the fear of repercussions from my employer. Negative repercussions. To this day, I'm concerned even about this podcast, that there'll be reprimands for it, that I'll be spoken to, something will be put on file, look at transferring, speak to the forced psychologist, change my medical profile, or the worst one, medically discharged, released, terminated, whatever. It's a big fear. And I still have it. So why am I doing this? Because ultimately, regardless of whether or not it's popular, I just believe in doing the right thing all the time. And this is the right thing. I'm doing nothing wrong. I'm not telling tales out of school. I'm not sharing things that aren't public or couldn't be shared. This is my story. And I know a lot of my brothers and sisters are struggling, just like I was and still am. But they're really struggling with whether or not they can come out, whether or not they should talk. They should keep it to themselves. Should they go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist? Is there someone they can trust to speak with? Does anyone know what's going on with me? What the frick is wrong with me? Why do I feel so alone? I understand those feelings. And that comes back to why I'm doing this. I want to be the voice. I want to be that comforting voice. Gives you the ability to be okay with not being okay. Now, I know that line gets used. It sounds cheesy. That's fine. But it's a reality. It's a reality that people seem to have an issue if they're not okay, especially mentally. I mean, we talk about physical injuries, surgeries that are needed, diseases, blown knees, broken bones, whatever. I mean, the worst of the worst. And what do we wish people? Dear God, please, I hope you get well. Hope you heal up fast. Mental health is different. It shouldn't be different. It's an injury. But people treat it differently. And they almost treat it as if it's contagious, as if they could catch it from you. That's the thing that needs to really stop. I understand that people are concerned about you. That's fine. Great. But the concern has to be genuine. People who are struggling with mental health issues need to be treated no differently than those who have physical issues. I mean, after all, PTSD, although considered a psychological disorder, actually does have physiological changes. There are actually changes to the brain that cause the disorder. A physiological change, not just a change in thoughts. It changes. Think of football players in the NFL. Their concussion protocols now. Well, they used to never have those. But they found that the concussions were leaving scars, leaving marks, changing the composition of the brain. I just use that as a metaphor, but PTSD does have some similarities. I mean, after all, we were not designed to see, to smell, to touch, a lot of the things that we've had to do. And we do it because, hey, we signed up for this job and we wanted to serve the public and try to make the world a better place. Again, may sound kind of lame, but it's the reality of things. And it has this long-lasting effect. And it just changes. And it tends to be, I think, at least in my case, a slow change, a gradual change. Now I look back and think, yeah, I can see those changes now. But at the time, no. I was pissed off because I was pissed off. I didn't feel I was pissed off any more than I would have been before, but I was. So I want to be a voice, not the voice, a voice, for those of you out there who are struggling, who are quiet, who are wondering if they should seek help. Can they seek help? What's going to happen to me? Well, follow along. Follow along. We'll see if there's repercussions down the road. But again, I'm doing what's right. I'm doing what needs to be done because there is a suicide epidemic when it comes to our first responders, our military, vets, people who serve in the service of others. Choosing to not display pain doesn't mean you're impervious. It does not mean you're not bearing it. It doesn't mean you're not scared and struggling. It means you have yet to find those with whom you can share same without the fear of encumbering shame. That you choose not being nudged so you can prevent being judged. That's something I wrote about a year ago. I mean, just let it sit. Seems quite applicable for today's conversation. Because you're not displaying pain doesn't mean you're impervious to it. Because you do display it doesn't mean you're not bearing it. You just got to find that right person to talk to. You've got to be willing to give up a little bit of that trust for the greater good. Because you are the greater good. You are worth it. So if you're concerned about stigmas, well, here's my advice. Personally, I don't give a fuck what people say. I just don't give a shit. Yeah, it can be hurtful. I wish they wouldn't say it, but I'm not going to fucking live my life by it. Not a chance. It's not happening. Done that for too long. Too many years. I'm done. I'm tapping out with that shit. Say what you want. I know what goes on inside me. I know what happens between my ears. That gray mass. I know. And if you don't understand it, that's fine. I'm actually fucking really happy to hear that you don't understand it. But don't talk shit about it. Funny because I think a lot of those people that talk shit about it are actually struggling themselves and just really confused or afraid to deal with it. And for those people, I feel very sorry. I mean, I say that, I guess, with a chuckle because, well, the last thing you really want to do if you're struggling is talk shit about people who are struggling, but at least had the nerve to step up, face the music, get help, get better, get well. Maybe that's something they need to do. Maybe that's something that you need to do. At the end of the day, vets and first responders have to not only survive the experience, but learn to live with it for the rest of his or her life. I still haven't learned, but I also am still learning. Hopefully that gives you a little bit more information about me. I'll keep sharing my story in each episode of this series. This is the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. Let's go to a quick break.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you have experience with post-traumatic stress and would like to join me for an episode, please reach out to me. You can contact me via direct message on Instagram, PTSD_podcast, or you can send me an email at papatangosierradelta@gmail.com. Cheers.
This episode of the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast is brought to you thanks to the support and financial sponsorship of Cracked Armor. Go to crackedarmor.com, read the story, buy the gear, wear it to send a message to others who are struggling that they're not alone. Also to Willow Tree Farms, care of Jason Sobkowicz, another member who is struggling with PTSD and who updates his Instagram frequently to share his story. You can follow him at jason.sobkowicz. We are back from the break. Thank you again for tuning in for the Papa Tango Sierra Delta podcast. Quite excited that we're being joined right now with a good friend of mine, Joe Flemming, who is retired from the Canadian Armed Forces. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Larry. Appreciate being here.
Absolutely, man. So, Joe, it's okay for me to say that you too have been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress.
I have, yes.
One of the things we talked about off air, which I think, we're going to just jump right into this right away. You had mentioned a big thing that concerns you and that's really stuck with you is the fact that you can so quickly, I guess, go from innocent and moldable to all of a sudden being very closed off and distrustful. Tell me about that.
I think for me, it's one of those things where when I finally did get diagnosed with PTSD and I thought about the incidents that I believe brought that on with myself and so many other people, and then you come to realize it's like, well, I really don't feel like that should have been enough to break me. And so the more you sit and you think about it and you kind of dig in and you go through your past, you start to realize that there are things along the route, in life that do break you down. I think early on we get this false notion that we're being toughened up as we experience difficulties throughout our life. Mind you, they do help you feel like you're numb to things, so they may feel like they're not bothering you as much. But the reality is that underneath they're causing damage that actually makes you more vulnerable and more vulnerable than you know. And then when all of a sudden that straw that's just too much comes along, you end up broken for reasons that you may feel that you shouldn't have been broken. But the reality is the damage was actually partially there before you got there.
Tell us all about the complexities of it being beyond just your issue.
What really came to the forefront for me is that as I realized I was dealing with PTSD, I wanted to reach out and I wanted to get help. But I found myself really struggling with who can I trust? I think anybody with PTSD realizes that it is difficult to speak with other people that haven't necessarily experienced similar traumas, or should I say it's easier to speak with people who have shared similar traumas. And so I felt like I was in a bit of a bubble. And then I started to break down the different life experiences to try to figure out why, because I did need help. I was finding myself being irritable around my kids and kind of stuck and not being able to function in everyday life. So I had to figure this out. And so I look back to when I was a kid. My mother left when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. I watched my father struggle to raise two boys and do it with very limited means. I mean, luckily we had a bigger family that was extremely supportive. But you still realize along the way especially at holidays like Christmas, that, your dad is struggling. And so you feel it's almost like you're more of a burden than a blessing. And that's that's a tough feeling to have when you're a kid. And so you start to wonder why this woman that you call mom would do this to you. So the trust starts to break down at a pretty early age. And then luckily my father found love. And, she's a wonderful woman. And, she had 4 boys of her own who I consider brothers, or they're stepbrothers, obviously. But no matter how much they tried, you still always had this feeling like, is this going to happen again? Is this woman going to do something that breaks us down further? And you still have that divide no matter how much, they try to bring that family together as one unit. And so that comes with its difficulties too. And you don't feel like you can really open up within a family like that. And then basically you start to look at, okay, where am I going to find, my support group? Where am I going to find the surrounding that makes me feel safe? And so you look into things like sports teams. You do things like joining the armed forces or joining these groups. I find that make you feel like somebody, as I've heard you say, somebody's got your 6.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's really, really important. And so I think as a young teenager, I was having a trust issue with women. And I thought, okay, but I need to now somehow battle through that and then look to find leadership and mentorship that's going to help me, carry forward. And unfortunately, like anywhere else, you can run into organizations that do have leadership issues. And I did find that when I was in the forces. And I found that, there were good leaders, but there was a lot of leaders that weren't so good. And so now I was in a situation where not only did I not trust women, I also didn't trust leadership. And that's tough. Now you're in a situation where you're really trying to find that safe space. And you've had an awful lot of society now is on the don't go there list. And so it's, that's tough. It really makes you feel like you're in a bubble at that point.
One of the things you'd mentioned as well is that, your development in a distrust in leadership causes some control issues at home.
I find, at least with myself, and I've heard others speak of it as well, that you get to the point where when you're isolated for so long, you start to feel like you're the only one who can do it right. You're the only one that you can trust to do certain things. And it starts off with, the big stuff. You want to be independent and you don't want to involve other people. But then it starts to creep into little things like family finances. It starts to creep into, small home repairs or just doing things around the yard. And it does. It puts up a wall and it starts to put up barriers in a marriage. It starts to create stress and tension where it doesn't need to be within the household. And you really do need to get a hold of that quickly, and you do need to find help if you find yourself in that spot, because those are the very things that can very easily break down a marriage and can very easily, destroy a family and take it to a bad place. So when I got there, it became extremely, extremely evident that was the breaking point for me. I really need to find help.
Let's go back to, again, something we had spoken about a few days ago, your subconscious triggers within a conscious mind. So, I thought that was very, very deep when you said that, the stresses of being immersed in a society that you perceive would look at you in a bad light instead of a victim. That is huge. And I think that's a big reason many people don't step out. I don't necessarily want to be seen as a victim. I actually hate the idea of being seen as a victim, but I also have a problem with being looked at as, well, like a wuss, like I'm not tough enough, buttercup, being perceived in the wrong light. And that's not what it is either. So, could you just talk to me about, dealing with your subconscious triggers?
What I find is, and I don't think it's any fault of any specific individuals or organizations type of thing, but I just find our society is in a place right now where it really likes to jump in and be supportive of one thing all at once, and everything else is, basically on the other side. It almost feels like it's mob-like. And so, for instance, right now, the LGBT and society is very much, dealing with those sort of issues and really calling out the people who are homophobic or phobic in any way, and who may support the people that are on the wrong side of what we deem as the wrong side of history. And so I get that, and I understand that, and consciously, I absolutely 100% support that. But one of the things that I battle with is the fact that, and I wasn't really planning to speak too much about this, but I think it is important, is that as big as my PTSD is from the forces, when I was a teenager, I got sexually assaulted. And I got sexually assaulted by a gay man. And part of the trust that, continued to break down is that I was drugged and I was lured by a woman into the situation. And so now you're looking at a guy who really doesn't trust women, and then really had that trust broken down further by being lured and brought into that situation, and then getting assaulted by a monster while you're begging that woman for help and to help you not be there, and trying to realize that wasn't a gay man assaulting you, it was a monster that was assaulting you.
Absolutely.
But no different than trying to tell a little boy who gets mauled by a dog 20 years later and saying, hey, listen, why are you scared of dogs? Not all dogs are mean. Not all dogs bite. Get over it. Well, how do you tell a little boy that's scared of a dog, 20 years later, and he's just not a big fan of them, to just get over it? It's hard to tell somebody who's actually experienced a trauma to not paint the world with a broad brush when they've experienced a trauma. So, and it goes to other levels. It could be, a teenage girl who gets sexually assaulted by, 4 men in a dorm room some night. Well, how do you tell her that she should feel safe when she's alone at night in an area with 4 young men, even though those 4 young men may be the finest young men that are on campus?
Absolutely agree.
You can't tell somebody who has experienced a trauma that they should feel a certain way and that they can't paint a group of people a certain way. They're still dealing with that trauma and may never be able to get over that trauma. It's always going to be there no matter what help you get. And so for me, I find that in the society we're in, I am 100% supportive of treating every single human being on the planet with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. But I find it extremely difficult to come out and talk about an issue that you have basically painted somebody that the community at the current time is so supportive of and so behind, and speak ill of anybody within that community, and dealing with the fear that you yourself are going to get painted as a monster or somebody who is basically just not a good person because you are having a hard time jumping up and down and just being 100% immersed in the supportiveness of certain groups of people in our society.
I'm speechless for a reason because, well, to start, I really appreciate you sharing what is obviously an absolutely difficult thing to share. So I thank you for sharing that with me and for everyone who's listening who have experienced other traumas than those from horrific scenes or sites or work-based, because there's a lot of people who have experienced trauma due to the way they were raised, sexual assaults, abuse, physical, mental, and I just appreciate that you have spoken to that and hopefully have spoken somewhat to those who have experienced same. Let's get back to, you say you struggle, though you were assaulted by a homosexual male, you worry about speaking to that because of, I guess, offending someone or believed to be stepping out against the LGBTQ community, which is not what you're doing.
No, and that's just it. So here's the thing, right? And this is how I know that, because you have to gauge yourself. It's really easy to get into self-hatred or wondering if you are the monster. So for instance, I'm going to be flat out honest, and I've had to talk to my psychologist about this. I got to the point where I had actually planned, at least in my head, I wanted to find this man and kill him.
Wow. Well, there you go.
Okay? And so I had to deal with that. It's like, am I a monster here? Like, yeah, he assaulted me, but am I a human that's capable of taking another human's life? Am I really that horrible of a person? And then I've come to realize, it's like, no, it's when you're damaged and you're hurt, you go through some pretty crazy emotions when you're trying to, right that ship. But I think the way I found that I wasn't a monster is that I thought, okay, well, what if one of my kids came to me tomorrow and said, I'm gay, or I'm non-binary, or I'm anything at all? The reality is I'd wrap my arms around them and I'd protect them more so than I even do today. And so I know that deep in my heart, that's not an issue with me. And I know so many people that, are in a sexual, I guess you could say, orientation other than my own. And I don't even think about it, and I don't care. And I'm glad that people are happy and able to express themselves the way they want to express themselves. And especially in today's society, people are able to be who they really, truly feel they are. And hopefully someday without the fear of that having any repercussions. And so I'm very much in favor of that. And so on an individual level, on a conscious level, somebody who actually does care about people, I know that I'm thinking the right way. But those subconscious triggers that are in behind, for instance, I could have, it could be a family member, it could be a friend, anybody that is homosexual. And if they were to offer to take my boys for a walk, my conscious mind says, well, of course you can take them for a walk. Go and enjoy yourself and have fun. But there's a trigger and there's a red flag that says to me, think about the damage that you have incurred. If you make a mistake and if you are wrong about this, and this happens to your children, could you live with yourself? And so right away, even though in a conscious mind, there's absolutely no reason for me to have an issue whatsoever. I'm about to let my children go for a walk with an absolutely wonderful human being that I love, more than anything. However, there's a subconscious protection mode that kicks in that says, don't let it happen. Don't let it, just because it's a risk that is just too far and you won't be able to handle it if you're wrong. And that is a struggle. That is a struggle.
Do you find that just happens with someone who is homosexual, or do you find that happens with any male that you just, that you feel that you don't know well enough?
For me, to be absolutely perfectly honest, because of my trauma, it is really quite limited to a homosexual man or somebody that I think might be. And I want to make sure that I make this clear. I think that's only because the monster who assaulted me happened to be a homosexual man. I don't think homosexual men are monsters. But there's a connection there that just automatically comes because of my own experience and my own trauma. The reality is, I'm scared of a monster hurting my children. And it's just, there's a subconscious connection there between those two that isn't necessarily truthful, and it's all perception, and it's just in the subconscious. And it's just, that's part of the battle that I have, is that how do you fight your own subconscious issues?
Yeah, that really resonates with me just because of my experiences. And I've only shared so much at a time throughout the show with regards to my experiences. However, I haven't personally experienced being sexually assaulted. However, I have had to help people who were sexually assaulted. And it is something that has put me into a complete protection mode for anyone that I care about, I can't watch movies of sex assaults on TV. It absolutely triggers me. It just sets me off.
Yeah.
And so I get what you're saying, because so my thing is that I just don't fucking trust people. I mean, period.
Yeah.
I really don't care what your sexual orientation, your culture, your race, your fucking eye color, height. I don't care.
No.
I just don't trust people, because over my 20 plus years have met so many monsters, and it sticks with you. So I guess what I'm trying to say, Joe, is that I don't want people to lose sight of what this man is saying. He has an issue because he was sexually assaulted by a specific person that now has created triggers and fears. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost unfair to their community, to be honest with you, because what it's done is it's placed this very unnecessary preconceived notion in my subconscious mind that I hate. I hate that I have this protection mode. I hate the fact that these things go through my mind. I mean, you and I both know people that are in the gay community, and they're some of the most amazing people that I've ever met. They're absolutely wonderful people, and I'm so happy that they're in my life. And it's so hard to sit at home at night and basically judge yourself on these subconscious thoughts that go through your mind that you know they're not founded. You know there's no need for them to be there, other than the fact that this one monster, this one individual, has placed this burden on you. The community didn't place that burden on you. That individual placed that burden on you. And so when I found out that this man was dead, it was relieving for me, because I knew that this monster was gone. But I also felt like an opportunity was lost because I didn't have a chance to have closure as well. Because listen, it brings on a lot of things, and this is the level of trust that I have for you in this podcast, and the purpose of it is being able to actually speak about these things in a safe place, and I really do, and I appreciate that, Larry. But the reality is, it affects everything. It affects your sex life.
Yeah.
Like when this happened, it became a thing where you even with sex, you don't want to feel aroused, because you're laying there and you're betrayed by your body. It's like, I don't want to be aroused. I don't want to be here. I'm about to be a victim. But your body does what your body does based on stimulus. And so now you're in a situation where you even feel bad when you feel aroused. Well, have fun with that when you're trying to have a successful, healthy marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I deal with trying to stay the hell outside of my mind, which I find very difficult, let alone when we start talking about intimacy. I find it difficult staying outside of my own mind, of my, my experiences, my knowledge, my 20 years of trauma, of helping people who have experienced these things. And I guess I hold back so much, and I refuse to open up enough, I guess.
I think what it is that good people want to protect people, especially the people that are closest to us. And I think I know for me, and I suspect I know what you're getting at there, is that you find a way to almost bury it and eat it and hide it inside yourself so that it doesn't spill out and somehow either hurt the people that you love most or push the people that you love most away. And that's what I find it was with me, is that it's like, okay, yeah, you had this issue. You may feel this way, but don't put that on her. And that's where I was at. But I mean, the reality is, at the end of the day, when we finally did speak about it, they know. They could feel it. You didn't have to say it. You didn't have to do anything. They could tell that there was something not right. And when you finally do speak about it, at least it brings some understanding. My biggest worry was not hurting her, but I'm sure at some point she's like, does this guy still love me? I don't know whether or not she really thought that. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, she'd be a hell of a lot more relieved to find out that the reason why something didn't feel right was because of something that was traumatic and understandable, as opposed to the one thing that she feared the most that wasn't the case.
It's a very fine line.
Yeah, sure is.
It's a very fine line. And that's ultimately what I think becomes, well, at least my downfall was trying to bury everything and trying to put it all under the rug. And anytime anything would affect me or hurt, I just dust it back under that rug.
Yeah.
And there eventually comes a time the wind picks that rug up and all that shit comes out.
Yeah, sure does.
That's when it really, to me, it hit home, as well as how volatile it can be. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. I mean, there's other things as well that we talk about. So, we started to mention how it can affect intimacy. The other thing is, let's talk about some physical issues that PTSD affects. Like, obviously it can affect eating, it can affect alcohol intake, it can affect drug use and whatever. Yeah, let's talk about how has it affected you?
Yeah, well, I think for myself, I was always an athletic person. I was in shape. I really enjoyed physical exercise and the stimulation of playing sport and being competitive. And I think as things happened throughout my life, as these traumas happened, I started to not quite focus on it as much. Again, I think I was just becoming a little bit numb. And so that groundwork for what came later when I was in the forces, it was kind of being laid. When I finally hit that breaking point when I was in the forces, I found myself staying up late at night, sleeping during the day, eating at the wrong times, not engaging in the same level of physical activity, even though the opportunity was there, and just having a general bitterness, I guess you could say, towards the world. And it resulted in some incredible weight gain for myself. So on a personal level, it resulted in a weight gain that also makes you feel trapped. So you feel trapped by your PTSD. And for me now, it's because of a couple of different issues, as we've spoken about. And so now that bubble's even bigger. So now you feel like even your own body is a bubble. And it becomes very difficult to recuperate after having an injury. You get scared to injure yourself, so you don't partake in so many activities. And it also affects your personal life as well. You want to go on a long walk or a hike. Well, when you're a bigger guy, there's roadblocks to that too. And so for me personally, it resulted in weight gain. That was my physical problem. Now, some people, when they're stressed and they have issues, they resort to exercise. They resort to hardcore workouts and weightlifting. They resort to running. Everybody has their outlet. And, not a day goes by where I wish, man, why do Doritos have to be your outlet? Why couldn't going for a jog have been your outlet?
I hear you. I understand. For a while, bourbon.
Yeah.
Bourbon is mine.
Yeah.
So you say as well, and I'm just, again, going through our conversation earlier this week, there's a transition you've made from being angry or self-hatred to letting things go, to accepting, trying to fix it and feeling like you're worth fixing. That is a huge transition, and one that a lot of people struggle with making. I would really like you to speak to that if you could, Joe, because I if there's anything, I believe that can really help others that are just stuck, that are trying to cross that road.
I think of what it comes down to, and I'm only partway through that journey, and I don't know how long that journey is. I don't even know if that journey ends, but I do know that you do have to go through those things in order to get there. And for myself, at first you don't even know that you're dealing with the issue. And then when you finally do realize that, there is something wrong, it's usually because you do have this anger or some emotion. Maybe it's not anger for some people. Maybe it's a depression or something else. But for me, it was anger. I found myself bitter and angry at the world, and I didn't quite know why. And then when I finally did figure out why, I had to find out, well, how do I go from being angry to finding this acceptance so that I could sit down with somebody and constructively figure out a way to fix it. And you have to. You can't do it when you're angry. You can't do it when you're just so pissed off at the world because you were victimized in some way. And PTSD, it's damage. It's an injury. And I find that, the stuff that happened to me in the forces was a result of the world. Bad things just happened that you ended up being involved with, that you signed up for, and that you had to experience and witness. And some of it was even third party. Some of it is stories from people that have experienced traumas that you hear about. And I've got an inquisitive mind, so I want to see pictures and video, and I want to learn about it. And man, that stuff can get you too. But you have to get to the point where you can accept that you're broken. You can accept that, whether it be because somebody victimized me or I'm just a victim of circumstances. Either way, I am broken, and I do need to accept it. And I'm not a monster. I don't need to hate myself because I couldn't handle the things that have been tossed my way. And then you can constructively find a way forward. And for me, it's been with the help of psychologists to help me deal with these issues and coping mechanisms so that I can then actually act positively in the world, basically. I can actually get back out there and talk with people and trust a little bit and stick my head outside that bubble a little bit and then realize that, hey, the world's not so bad if you got yourself surrounded by the right people. You don't have to stay in that bubble. You can get out there, and it can be a good place if you're willing to accept it and if you're willing to take the help.
I'm very intrigued by the term third-party PTSD.
Now, I made that up. I don't know if that's a real thing, but that's what I call it.
Well, I'd never heard it before, and it does intrigue me. And I think that a lot of people don't realize, whether you call it third-party PTSD or just another traumatic episode, I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize things that they've... let's talk about first responders, military. Let's talk about dispatchers. Some of the things that they see and hear, even in a training scenario, can be very, very traumatic. And so is that what you mean by third-party PTSD?
It's certainly a collection of those things. I know for me, it kind of stemmed from having probably more of an inquisitive mind than I'd like to have. I'd like to kind of go back and unsee some things. For instance, I would hear a story from either a friend who was a police officer or a friend who was deployed overseas about their experiences, and I would have to research that. So whether it be some of the horrible things that ISIS was doing to some of the people they captured, or some of the battle footage, because when you do find the sources that are willing to show you what reality is, it's not very fucking pretty. And it's not something that you can unsee, but for some reason my brain needs me to see it.
Yeah, I understand that. I really do understand that. You just lose a sense of ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance and rudeness. I just mean a sense of that everything is nice and everything is cool. And
it's a truth thing. It's a truth. You're looking for what is really happening.
You actually get a sense of how evil people can be.
Absolutely.
And it's very disturbing, very traumatic. Yeah. Let's get back to you talking about, speaking to psychologists, engaging in the search of finding a better you, of trying to learn how to cope with things better and deal with things better. How is that going for you? How long have you been engaged? Tell us about that.
It's going well. Part of the journey for me is, where you go from that point of self-hatred to acceptance. There's some time in there to reflect on, how am I going to cope with those emotions? Like I mentioned the fact that I was worried that I was capable of taking the life of another human being over my own trauma. Well, when I think of somebody who's capable of taking the life of another human being, I'm thinking, oh, that's not a very good human being. And that was obviously the major thing that was in my mind, but just the fact that I needed to know that I was still a good person, that I was worth fixing. Is somebody who's willing to take a life, or somebody who constantly feels like, somebody or folks in the gay community are monsters, or that women can't be trusted and that they're, you need to always be on the alert. How can somebody who has those thoughts possibly be a good person, and how can they be fixed, and are they even worthwhile fixing? Well, thank goodness that I did find somebody to speak with that through their professionalism has allowed me to understand that those feelings are natural to trauma. They are a natural progression through your mind finding a way to heal. And for me, I even said at one point, this guy who had caused me trauma, I said, he's dead and gone. but would it be okay to, like, I don't know, piss on his headstone or something? Is there something that I can do? And you know, my therapist just said, I can't tell you what to do, but that's better than killing somebody.
Yeah, it's not against the law. Well, I guess maybe somewhat.
Well,
but,
maybe.
Well, somewhat. But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe if you do it in a Gatorade bottle first and just bring
and then
it
just
pour
dump it on there. Yeah, that's
there you
right.
go.
And so it's just one of those things where I think as you go through those emotions, and you realize that they're natural and it's okay, and that you're not a horrible person, and then you realize that you have to go through those in order to get to that place of healing. And fixing yourself, and I'm just really thankful that I have found help, and through just talking to people, including this podcast. This is why I think this is so important, Larry. Is that, you know, I haven't opened up about this stuff. The stuff we've talked about today, we've talked about at a level that I have never opened up to anybody other than my psychologist about. And to me, that means this is clearly a forum that I feel like I can trust, and a forum that I feel welcome and protected in. And it's so important for people to have that in their life, especially if they've had traumas, is find those places, find those forums where you can feel safe to speak about these things, because as you talk about them, just talking about them, not even processing them, just talking, is so helpful. It takes so much weight off of your shoulders.
So, man, I'm really glad to hear, and something I want to make sure it's out there is that you maintain the control, in the sense of you want any of this to be edited, or you don't want this to air. It does not ever need to air. This can be a talk between you and I, or it can be a talk that can be shared with others who are struggling. But that control is with you, and that is a very important thing to me. The feeling of being in control. Not that I need to control everything, but it becomes control in a sense that I don't like being startled. I want to be able to protect the important people in my life. I want to be prepared for situations. I need to control things. And even if things are out of my control, I will somehow blame myself for missing a variable that I should have controlled. Do you feel that at all?
Yeah, having that control. And for me, I find it strange. It's like it presents itself in some of the weirdest scenarios. You know, it's like I need to have this ultimate control over something simple like, you know, a bank account. But yet I can go out on the ocean in a boat and not even really sure if I have enough fuel to get back to shore, but just say, yeah, fuck it, let's just go and we'll deal with it when it comes.
Yeah, that's an experience I've had with you before. You didn't share that with me until we were coasting in. But I think ultimately, you know, that control stuff as well comes down to just the fact that a lot of what's traumatized us were situations that we couldn't control.
No, that's just it. Sometimes I wonder, like I know I spoke a little bit about, you know, this fascination with really, you know, if I break it down, it's the fascination with the moment of death. And I had experienced, and we've talked about this in the past, I won't get into it, but I was within 5 seconds of a suicide and ended up witnessing something at quite a young age. And when I look back and I look at all the situations all the way along, the things that I was fascinated with was that moment where you go from being alive to being dead. Now, and I'm not talking about the violence. I don't love violence. No. It's just that, just intrigued with that moment, whether it be just laying in a hospital bed and that moment where you go from taking that last breath to you are to you aren't. Because there is such a lack of control there. That is not within your control, whether it be from an outside source or whether it be from, you know, natural causes. And for me, I think my fascination when it comes to control is just how we don't have control of that one thing. And I almost feel like I keep on searching it out as though I'm trying to find the key that unlocks the ability to control it. And the reality is that no matter what I see and how much I see and how much I look at, the reality is you just don't have control, and you have to find a way to be okay with that.
Yeah, no, I'm not okay with that.
No, I'm not either.
I'm not okay with not having control.
I know. I'm not really either. But
I struggle. You're going to hyperventilate me here, Joe. Hold on a second, man. I understand that is a huge thing, and obviously I am not completely on the other side. I agree with you 100% that this is a journey that is the rest of your life. It stays with you. and you have to continue working on it, and you have to understand that you're going to have really shitty days, but also that there are good days in there too. And I think one of the things that I'm still needing to work on, well, I don't think it, I know one of the things I still need to work on is the control thing, because again, go back to that assault that you spoke about. I mean, ultimately, you were a kid and you did not have control, and someone took advantage of a vulnerability. And that is, I think, a lot of times what I've seen in my experience of so many people who are victimized is just a vulnerability. And I think that's ultimately what a lot of times brings out the distrust, some of the rage, you just see so many monsters out there.
The robbing of the trust. I think that, for me anyway, that's the biggest thing. So, for instance, I can deal with a lot of things, but I hate not being able to trust things or people. Somebody lying to you, somebody swindling you, if somebody steals something of yours, if somebody, basically does something that really forces you to not be able to trust. So for me, the sexual assault, listen, physically, it's terrible. But I think the biggest thing is the fact that he robbed my trust. He and this girl that, took part, they robbed my trust. So the only thing we have in life to survive is the ability to trust somebody. When they take that away, what do you have left? You struggle your life trying to find that trust. And man, it can just be so hard. And I don't want to, make it sound like it's not doable and it's just doom and gloom and whatever. But the reality is, it's fucking reality. When you don't have trust, what do?
You start to internalize, you start to really close in your social activity. You start to take on some major coping things, like some of the physical things we talked about, whether it's drinking or eating. You just really limit your pool of individuals with whom you will communicate. And that, again, comes back to a control issue, because if you can control the environment, then you can control the trust. And so long as you, in that sphere that you've created, trust all those people, then you feel a lot safer. The concern is that when that as well starts to either break down in reality or just break down that you are now worried about the people in that sphere, whether or not you can trust them. And things can really go south quickly when that happens.
Yeah, it sure can. And it's a lonely feeling. It's a lonely feeling because you're carrying this burden of, being in this bubble, but also the feeling that you need to protect everybody else from what's in your bubble. It's just a heavy feeling, and you start to wonder, it's like when you almost feel like you don't have time to work on you because you're so worried about trying to protect the world from you. That's what I find, at least for me. Not so much now, but there was that period of time where it was just, I needed to, I didn't trust myself to not put unnecessary issues, I guess you could say, on the people around me. So for instance, my kids, they didn't experience any of the traumas that I did. And I hope they never do. But I felt like, and I still feel like it's on me to make sure that they do trust women, because they have incredible women in their lives. Every woman around them is spectacular. But also that the people in their community, regardless of who they are and what part of the community they belong to, they're incredible people. There really are incredible people in our community. And so I have to be very careful not to take my experiences and transfer it to them, whether it be through conscious or subconscious actions or words. And that's a hell of a burden when you're struggling yourself to kind of deal with society and your own issues. Now, thankfully, like I said, thank goodness for the strong women in my kids' lives. I mean, in my wife, is that she knows exactly when to step in and kind of separate the thoughts and make sure that I don't go too far or say something I shouldn't.
I mean, without that support, I'm not really sure how, well, I mean, it becomes significantly more difficult to push forward without having a strong network of support.
Mm-hmm.
And I likewise am very, very blessed to have the network that I have. I don't even want to fathom what could have happened without them. It's scary.
It is.
Joe, this is your time, brother, to share whatever you want to say to people who, whether it be, through a professional traumatic issue as a result of an operational stress injury, or a person who has been through a traumatic event outside of that, whatever you want to say, the floor is yours.
I think the message that I want to get out there is one, when it comes to myself and the things we talked about today, is that I don't want people to take my feelings or my triggers or my distrust, whether it be perceived or otherwise, as true feelings towards any group of people, and to be very mindful of the fact that there are other people out there that have experienced a similar or same traumas that I have, and they're going to have these feelings. And as a society, we need to kind of give them that little bit of leeway. And I know in this society, we are pretty quick to judge and to paint with a brush. But when it comes to PTSD, what we hear most about are the traumas that are experienced within, active service, whether it be armed forces, policing, first responders, and things like that. And because those are the things that I think are easiest to understand, and get it. It's like, yes, you went and you experienced something terrible, you come back and your mind is damaged and you need to deal with that. But with all of those people who have experienced that, the things that I think don't get talked about and that aren't understood are the underlying issues of the damage that they've experienced along the way. And so every one of those people that has experienced those major incidents or events that have caused PTSD, and some of them accrue over time, obviously, through their careers, but there is always underlying damage from stuff that is more difficult to understand. And as a society, we need to give those people a little bit of space and understanding to basically grow, learn, accept, and then fix those issues, because they're not easy. I don't really know how to express it any differently other than people are not simple. The human brain is not simple, and everybody breaks at different points, and the reason why everybody breaks at different points is because everybody is damaged different levels from things that they may not even know that they've experienced. And so we just need to give that little bit of space to people to experience that.
You have heard what you have heard because Joe was willing to share it. Joe, I really appreciate your time, your openness, your willingness to come talk. It's huge. It really is huge. And I wish you nothing but the best, obviously, to continue working on finding that level of calm, of forgiveness, of trust that many of us are struggling to find. You've tuned in to the papatangosierradelta podcast. I really do thank you for your time, for listening today. My name is Larry Payton. I have your 6. Please have mine.
And I sing, hey, don't go away. There's so much left to do, so many things I want to say. And I sing, hey, don't make the change. If it rains every single day, I'll fight to blow it all away.